Welcome to Lunch with Tech Leaders, where we have engaging conversations about software development and cloud engineering with industry leaders and subject matter experts. These episodes are created by the Great Lakes Tech Leaders, an online community of technology practitioners. Please come join the conversation by visiting gltl.rbn.ai. Again, that's gltl.rbn.ai. Now strap in, because we're deploying to production in 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, hello and thank you. Welcome to the latest episode of Lunch with Tech Leaders. My name is Derek DeJonghe. I'm going to be the host for today. Joining me is software data consultant Tom Kowalski.
Hello.
And we also have our business and technology consultant, Joe Coleman. Joe is in the audience, so he's always around, and he's going to be helping facilitate any questions that come from the audience. Make sure that we're paying attention and get those up. And great. So today we're going to be covering a topic about what is senior engineering. Got a lot to talk about here, so grab your fork and let's dig in. Let's go ahead and introduce our subject matter expert, Vagish. Vela. You want to give yourself a little introduction here?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I was trying to think about what my title is, but I feel like I've gone a lot of them. But probably the one most relevant to this is I'm a software architect. Yeah, so I normally live in Ohio, so just a bit of a hop away from you. And excited to be here.
So let's go ahead and dig in here. This topic was brought up by Vagish. The topic today is what is senior engineering. So let's kind of roundtable this here and talk about what senior, the title, the role means to us, and kind of get this kicked off.
Yeah, I was intrigued by it when you had it proposed. There's senior engineering versus title senior engineer. So yeah, I'm wondering why'd you guys choose that?
It's been something that I've been hiring for quite a few years, and as I've been hiring, I've been really thinking about the title, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea behind engineering, I think, it's less about the title and it's more about the capability, and that's what you normally hire for, right? The capability of being able to do the engineering rather than the title.
Okay.
Right. I like that idea, right? Like, what are the skills and capabilities of the person rather than, where they're at as far as their career, right? I think this topic does have a lot to do with title and how people see themselves. The progression in one's career, people typically don't want to go back in title, which is one of the reasons I think, when I was working with Right Brain, we kind of try to steer away from the junior, senior, terminology, and kind of just go towards what type of function is this person providing? Are they doing engineering? Are they doing architecture? Are they leading? Where are they in that progression rather than this senior, the senior, junior title stamp? Or I've seen other companies do journeyman, craftsman, stuff like that.
Was there a specific reason why you stayed away from it? You all?
I think just because it's that's what we're going to cover here today.
Yeah,
it's kind of a blurry subject, and if you're what may be senior in one context may not be in another, right?
Definitely.
So what does senior engineering mean to you guys? Let's kick this around a little bit.
I think I'll go first because I think proposed it. For me, it's just this I think it's in a sense of having the capability, the knowledge, and understanding the responsibilities, right? Less than having X number of years of experience, right? I don't think 3 years of experience makes you senior, or 6 years, or whatever, totem pole we use, versus being able to show that actual experience, which is not something you years on paper on your resume really shows. It's like the actual experience that you can convey and embody and, do once you have a job or while you're doing your job.
Does that experience, is that more like the hands-on, like technical side, or would you also include like the managerial side to that as well of experience in leadership?
A senior manager?
Yeah, well,
I've seen it before, right? That is something I don't really understand.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand like, senior leadership is like, leaders of the leader, like managers of the managers, right?
Yeah. I guess what I'm getting at is, is it just experience, or is it also your ability, right, to lead others on your team, right, and to teach others on your team? Does that kind of play into it, or is it just straight individual contributor? Yeah,
yes.
Just have a lot of experience and value, and I guess what are those factors going there? What are the experiences?
I like that you brought up the term leadership and management, because I think the idea behind being a senior engineer, and at least the way for engineering, at least the way I see it, and I see it as like someone who is like, helps, is not really managing people, but is there to help lead someone through a problem, right? Being able to take their experience and to apply that to other problems and help people gain that experience as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's the ability to be a mentor, and kind of be there for others, while also having a deep, understanding of the problem at hand, the company, the organization, how things work, how things function, how it's supposed to function, being able to understand the vision that's been laid out by, the architecture teams and the people, the higher ups that are kind of trying to direct the company or the product in a certain way. Someone who's a senior should be able to understand that vision and help facilitate in the engineering organization, kind of do some of that translation, like, oh, when they say this is what we need to do from the technical side. So some of that like translation, I think is necessary for what I would consider senior.
Now, in your guys' practices, companies that you've been involved with, is that how it is, or is that how you'd like it to be?
Both. Being with Right Brain for a while, I saw a lot of different companies, and I've seen both sides of that. Right, I've seen you've been here for 3 years, you've gotten your 3 bumps, your pay bumps. It's time to give you an actual title bump. Whatever. Like I've seen it be very structured like that. And I've also seen it be more merit-based. So I've seen both sides of it. I think there's, I think what we're all kind of pointing at here is that like being a senior really shouldn't just be about like the time, right? Or tenure or whatever they call it. And it should be more about qualifications and qualities of the person and their attitude and engineering capabilities.
Yeah, I find it just interesting of saying like the senior engineering, right? And that title, it kind of gets away from the title of a role, which I feel like can, it's a better description the way, that you go about it of saying, senior engineering, in portraying like what we're saying, like having those qualities and experience versus, when you start just talking about roles, the titles of roles, I feel like that in my experience, what I've always dealt with, it's more of a kind of negotiating, right? It's part of your salary in compensation, and it can be used with that, right? I've been involved in salary negotiation where your title is part of that. And it's like, hey, we can't give you this much salary, but we can give you this better title. It's kind of like a compensation piece. So yeah, I guess that's been my experience throughout my my career. So yeah, it's just interesting to think about it in terms of what is a senior engineer versus just like that title. And it'd be nice if it was like that, right? if everyone had that standard of, yes, this is a senior, or the different levels or whatever, and thinking about it. But yeah, in my experience, it's always been kind of more of a, not so much anything to do with qualifications. It's kind of just a, here, you've been here for a while, or we want to hire you in at this. And, it was more of like a status, more, I don't know, signaling, right, to others, to make it easier to see, like, oh yeah, you've been here for a while, you kind of know what you're doing, or you're more senior status, right? You're getting paid more than me. This is kind of the how I've seen it. So that's just my little take on what I've experienced. I love that we're talking about what are the real qualifications, how should be. But yeah,
I've seen it as both. I've seen places where, people are compensated by the title too. I personally don't really care about the title. But it's also, feel like I've been working for long enough that I've been burnt by caring about what my title was. And
yeah.
And now I just, like, at the end of the day, it's like, you're doing a job, you do the best you can at your job, and you get paid for it, right?
What do you mean by burned by your title?
Oh, it's, where you get, you get promoted of sorts, but you end up getting more work because of your title than what you're compensated for, right? And it's this concept of you get really good at what you do, right? So you get promoted into a position that you don't actually have experience for yet.
Right.
Okay. You keep getting promoted until you don't get promoted anymore because you're not actually very good at the job you're promoted into. So you can't get promoted further.
It's interesting.
It's more of a corporate way of thinking. So it's time to get promoted, right? And that's where, like, your concept of senior engineer, things like that's interesting. I have a question for you, though. We're talking about, you talked about titles. What do you think about engineer 1, engineer 2, engineer 3? Like, that seems really odd to me.
When I see those, I see it as just strictly pay. I don't know what other companies do, but when I see it in a company from the outside, if you're, 2, 3, 6, whatever level, I just see it as that's, your company is just doing that for, like, the pay. I don't know.
I think that it really depends on the context of the company, right? So a lot of this, these titles and, like, levels, I think mean and have different functions in much larger organizations, like corporate organizations, right? Where things are rigid and structured. Mm-hmm. This is your role. This is what you do. And for instance, when I was at Barracuda, we had tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and those in support, and those had very different functions, right? Tier 1 was you pick up the phone, you work the case, you try and figure everything out. If you need to escalate, you go to your tier 2. There's a tier 2 in every pod, and those people are there. They have the seniority. They've been there for years. They know, they've seen all the problems. They know how to work through issues. They're a bit more capable in troubleshooting and debugging because they've just been there they've been there longer. They work the harder problems. And then tier 3 are, like, right next to engineering. They're intimately involved, taking those problems that are serious problems to engineering and working through them with them. So there's the multiple different functions there. So that's kind of how things escalate through that support structure. So I understand how, those levels work in bigger organizations. I think, in smaller orgs and where things are, like, more startup-y and more intimate, that's kind of just overkill, right? Like, why do we need to have all this structure when it's more of a, you're here to do a job. If you're doing your job, you're going to get paid and respected the way you should be, right?
The other side of it too that I've experienced, 'cause I worked for one company for a very long time. So internally, like I spoke of, it was, had one aspect of it, but when I was looking for something else, there's another aspect to it of, now it's signaling to, other employers that's like a huge signal, right? Of your title, not necessarily, you can say what you've done or whatever, but a lot of the algorithms, they look at those titles. So while I disagree, so this came up with me, while I disagree with, using like DevOps in a title, 99% of, the algorithms and, what HR representatives are going through and looking at, you may need to put DevOps in there to see it, because that's kind of the job that they're hiring for. So what do you guys think of that as, the title is more for your next job?
Yeah, I can see where you say that. I think your title I think it comes down to your brand, right? If people see the growth, they see, okay, this person has experience, and obviously with other jobs, like, I'm actually surprised how little real assessment companies do often when hiring people. They kind of do more a broader set, but that's a conversation for another day. There are things that, especially now with things like LLMs being used in recruiting processes, people are clearly looking for keywords. But I think it's not so much just the title to get your next job. I think it's also seen as something to get a promotion, to get more money, right? That's why most people move from one company to another, is to get more money. But it doesn't signal that you're actually competent to be a senior engineer.
That's right.
Some company gave you the title. Like, I mean, right now, I own my own company. I mean, I could call myself the president of my company, right? That doesn't mean that now I'm more important than everyone else in this pool, right? I just made up my own title.
Right.
It doesn't feel that way to you, but to the outside, I feel like it is a big factor, right? In that what your title is.
So how do we identify that senior level, right? Like, let's maybe kick around like talent versus skill or something like that, right? Like, we were kind of prepping for this, and some things came to mind. Like, I've seen, interns coming out of college that are just, have raw talent. Like, they just get it. Some people may need to, work at it a little bit longer, like, and develop skill, right? And like, where in that do we kind of go from, okay, this is someone who's, just figuring it out, or, maybe they've, been around for a while, but they're just, move at a different pace or something like that. Does speed, have anything to do with being senior, or is it more so the context and the foresight, right? In how to solve these problems? I think that, like I said, I've seen, whiz kids come out of, internship programs that, like, man, they could be considered senior, right? They have 0 years of experience. Are they like, but they understand the problem. They're easy to talk to. They're easy to communicate. They're like good to communicate with. They lead well. Can they jump straight into to a senior role? Or as, crusty, old IT heads, do we want to put them through the ringer of, oh, well, you've got to be here for 4 years, right? I know we've been saying time doesn't really mean anything, but I just thought that was kind of an interesting idea here, right? Like the talent versus skill.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind is maybe they are, but it's kind of what does that look like, to the rest of the organization, right? And like, how do they feel, right? If you've been there for 3 years and maybe or 5 years and they don't have a senior title, or aren't considered senior. And yeah, somebody's only been there for maybe 2 years, but yeah, like you said, is right on and nailing it in all of those aspects. Yeah. How does that affect others, right? In the company?
Yeah. You don't want to like, disturb the peace and have a revolt, because you've hired, some teenager in as a senior engineer, when you've got people who have been in there putting in the time and effort and loyalty to the company. And they don't feel respected because somebody else just came in. That's definitely something you got to consider when hiring for these roles.
What if you flip it the other way around? It's an interesting thing. I had this issue at a company I worked for a long time, and it was very much corporate, right? So it's Fortune 500 company. It's very corporate. Like, I mean, they didn't even have they had very specific role titles, and everyone in that band level right? You know, they had bands would have the same type, right? And then it'd be like, I think it went like, it was like you're an IT professional, you were like a senior IT professional, a lead IT professional, then it was like an IT leader, IT director or whatever, right? But the interesting thing I found is, what happened is when a lot of sort of, I'm not saying they're younger in terms of age, but younger in their professions, they would deliver really groundbreaking stuff, right? And when they noticed that they weren't really going to get promoted, they left, right? So then the challenge that you get is if you don't, give people who have the capability, the roles, then, the company runs the risk of losing those people with the capability. And that's also the pipeline, right? That they're building, they're damaging their pipeline, and that will affect their longevity, and it's expensive to hire.
It's expensive to hire. It's expensive to hire somebody who's capable of providing this function out of the gate, right? Like it's much more economical, we'll say, to hire someone and make the investment into them, grow that person's skills, capabilities, and ability to mentor others. But like you said, it's a risk if they don't feel like they're being compensated adequately. Then you've made that investment in someone, and then they're taking that somewhere else, and they're going to get a bigger payday because they're coming in with those capabilities and they're able to lead and provide that job, that role out of the gate, where it takes time to build that in someone. So they're much more valuable when they're able to come in and have that already developed.
I think it's more expensive to hire people that you train than hire people who are ready to deliver. I know it might seem more expensive upfront, but in the longer run, I think it's cheaper to hire, someone who can hit the ground running. Then
I think that, I was going to say, I think that depends on what and where, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely see where you're coming from. Like if someone comes in and they're able to start making you money instantly, like, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But it depends on if you're able to get somebody on the job training while they're, at a lower rate that you pay them, but you're still billing them out, like, or they're still providing some sort of value to the company that is, still on par.
It depends on the organization too. Like, that's great if you can if your organization is so good where someone can join and hit the ground running. But usually there's a lot, of learning the ways of how things work. The company too, I feel like, plays into it. And
what are the leadership qualities we would look for in a senior? We talked about mentorship, right? Being easy to communicate with, someone who values documentation. Maybe that's one.
Good documentation.
Patience. Like, I would say patience is key.
Yep.
Because especially, and now obviously, there's different circumstances, right? Whether you're working in an agency or working in a house or whatever, it's always going to be some disagreement because, you're writing code and you're working on code and you're basically making decisions day to day, right? On how to implement something that can have ramifications long term. And, I think patience is probably key. And especially, I've had situations where I've had good senior, I'm using the term senior engineer in this case, but good senior engineers who took the time with me early on in my career and taught me what a good senior engineer looks like. And I've had others who point out your flaws and don't try to help you overcome them, right? Your mistakes that it's good to make mistakes, you learn from them, but if you're shamed for your mistakes, you don't want to disclose your mistakes, right?
Right.
You want to be in a safe environment that you can make a mistake.
I mean, that's just good culture, right?
I mean, I can give you a good example. I went to, do you remember like Meta about 2 or 3 years ago? They had that huge outage where all their authentic, WhatsApp, Instagram, everything, you couldn't log in.
I do remember that, yeah.
I met the guy who ran the team, and I thought about it. And when that went down, the first thing he said is, because what they do is they do load testing, but someone built the load tester, but they had it so if you didn't pass in the region that they took down, it took down all regions, and no one realized that. So it took down all the regions and authentication went through one system. The senior, the first thing he did was like, is that guy okay? Like, that was his question. Not like, who did this wrong? But like, whoever's done this, like, is probably quaking right now because it's, they're probably scared, right? Are they going to lose their job? Whatever. And ultimately, he did lose a job. The senior actually didn't even disclose who did it. He took on the brunt of the kind of situation. And I thought it was like that kind of thing. He said, if I went and said, we're going to fire this person, no one else is going to come to me and tell me something went wrong. Like, I want people to come to me first. I thought that was like really valuable. That kind of, that foresight where you think one step further, not just the immediate, and being able to, in a moment of high stress, think about your team, think about your people, think about how, thinking about the longevity.
I like what you said there too about the ownership, right? Taking ownership. Even if you're, delegating something, right? You have to be able to take that ownership, right? And not say, oh, it was somebody else on my team, right? If it's flowing to you, that's, where that buck stops, like, from, that visual side of it, right? Of what people see, right? Yeah, I'm taking the ownership. I like that. My bad.
Having that connection with the team is also, I think, pretty important, right? And I think that kind of weighs into hiring someone into a senior role from outside the company is, potentially, it just could put you in a precarious situation, right? I think having the respect of the team is important when promoting to a senior engineering role, because you have that connection. The people do feel welcome to come to you. You've kind of got the history and the history with the team and the product that you're working on.
And I think that's kind of an interesting thing. It's like, we were discussing salaries and roles, and I feel like salary and the role are disconnected. I don't think we get necessarily paid more for being a senior engineer in terms of leadership, things like that. Like, there's obviously going to be a component of people who've been there for a while who might get paid more at a lower title.
Mm-hmm.
So, and maybe that's like the way, and this is probably more my idealistic, and I've seen this in a couple of the clients. The thing, the one people at the OC, I saw really great senior engineer, and I never heard him say he did this. Every time on demo day, he'd be talking about the junior engineers and the people he was helping. He was like, oh, this person came up with this solution for this problem, and like highlighting them and motivating them to want to come up and demo and push themselves, right? Rather than thinking, I'm the one. It's like, how can I help you, right? How can you make all the people on your team feel important, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah. I like how you said you're idealistic. What would your idealistic, titling be? Let's say, large corporation, how would you do it?
I would think, senior engineers really are more like, they're more of a mixture of like people leaders, right? They lead people as well as do the work. It's actually a tricky one.
But would you have senior engineer titles? Like, what titles would you have? How would you do it?
I would just call people software engineer, and then have like a team lead, and then there might be a couple of people who are outside it, which are more architects that are architecting solutions and systems, and then they pass it on. But like the software engineers, I think just have them have the same title and they can all have different salaries based on how they negotiated and or, you know, what they bring to the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely like that, using that way, right? Like you've got a couple different titles that kind of describe the job function of that person. The level at which I think is less important, right? As some people for some people, it is kind of like a, you know, pat on the back, you know, attaboy type situation where they really, you know, care about their title, and you know, you can work through that with them on an individual basis. But I personally, I like to go the route of, you know, whose line, like the titles are made up and, you know, the job function's what matters anyways, right? Like,
I think everybody says that we want to do that, right? Like, I agree. I'm just, what are the repercussions, right? Like, why don't people do that? Are there legal aspects to it, right? Or
I'm not giving any legal advice here.
Yeah. Just from like an HR standpoint, it's like, oh, we need to do this, or, you know.
Yeah, I don't know.
No.
I think HR, at least this experience, is like, I mean, there's key words, right, that identify things, and you know, HR is not abstracted away from the day to day, right? So it's like when you get to the point that you're working with HR, it's I mean, they need something to quantify that, right? They can't be in the abstract, right? Where it's like, oh, everyone's the same, but why are you paying this person like double this other person, right? Or whatever, right? And that's where the titles come into play.
Right.
And then, oh, okay, this person's a senior engineer, so that makes sense, right?
Yeah. And then some of them, that's like there's in the back of their system. And I know I did deal, I've dealt with at an organization that I worked in. They had their system that they use, their software or whatever, had set titles. And like when they moved to that, it was like, oh, we need to redo titles, at least right in the back, just so it matches up with the system.
Right.
Which is kind of interesting.
I mean, I also I kind of see like where a title, like if I'm paying you this much, you should be able to perform this function, so you're going to get this title. You know what I mean? I expect someone of like that's being paid this much to be able to perform this function, so this is the title that they're going to get, right?
So, okay. I'm get your guys' take on this on a personal note. So yeah, I've worked at one company for a while. I got my title when I left was chief architect, and I kind of pigeonholed me, right? I didn't want to do like a management position, but it was a smaller company, so I knew like chief architect, it didn't translate to like a larger company that I want to work at, right? It wouldn't be like a lateral move, so it was kind of hindering me, I guess you could say. So yeah, I took
Is that because you're putting so much weight on like this title is my titles are growing, right? Does it really matter if you go back to, you know, senior engineer or whatever? Like, let's say, like, yeah, I know what company you're talking about. That kind of a small company. If you like, let's say you step into Chase or something like that, a senior engineer role there is going to have a lot of different problems to solve, right? Like,
yeah,
is it like, I think that, you know, the role and the title, you know, mean different things in different organizations, right? Like if you're if you're like, you know, coming from a, you know, CTO of, you know, some startup, that doesn't really mean as much as someone who is like, you know, director level at some massive corporation. You know what I mean? Completely different responsibilities, stress levels, and you know, weight of value in what they're providing.
Yeah. So here's where I'm going with that. So I did a little bit on my own for a while, and now I'm working with another organization, and they only have engineer and senior engineer, which, you know, I'm fine with, but I haven't updated my LinkedIn yet, and I was thinking about it, and I'm like, oh yeah, what does that look like to the outside world, right? Does it look like I'm getting demoted or whatever? And
I think anybody who looks at that as a demotion and doesn't understand what's actually going on, what does their opinion matter anyways?
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering for HR purposes, right? Looking for another job, right? What does that say, right?
Well, I mean, that's what I'm getting at the same thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
if that person who's like coming at you or trying to recruit you or is, trying to do your salary negotiation doesn't understand, how some of this stuff works. It's like, maybe those aren't the people you want to be working for anyways. That's my take on it. That's how I run my business and my, my life. But yeah, I like to be picky like that and say, if you don't understand where this is coming from, or if I have to defend myself and my position and my value, then you're not who I want to be working with.
Yeah, I agree with that. But yeah, I kind of brought up, it's like another aspect of it too, is that LinkedIn brings up, because before, right, no one ever knew anybody's titles, but now it's kind of like, it's on display for the world, right? And yeah,
it's your little badge.
You can market it a different way. You'd be surprised how, most people probably use LinkedIn just to update their job, right? People don't pay too much attention, and if you market it in a specific way, then
yeah, it comes down to that branding, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, if you, for example, if you were posting every day about all the talks you were doing, say you were talking every week, even if you were talking in small amounts, right? It would look like you were an expert in whatever topic you did. The people wouldn't even question. Most people wouldn't question them. And so that's the thing with the titles is, if you talk about you don't have to even put your actual title down. You can talk about what you do, what you deliver. It's your space. You can own it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're gone pretty long here. I think it's time to kind of wrap things up. Do we have any closing thoughts? Any last little bits of wisdom, or
what title are you going to put down, Tom?
I'm thinking about it. Yeah, I was hoping this conversation might help me out, but it's maybe brought up more questions. I want to portray that. Yeah.
Cloud wizard.
You could be a coding ninja. Do you remember when people used to have those?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh yeah, ninja was the big one.
There were a lot of marketing too around that.
I had a friend who he said all his whole lineage was mechanics, and he always wanted to have a mechanic title. So when they allowed him to make his own title, it was DevOps mechanic. I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Well, want to take the opportunity to thank you both for coming and kicking this topic around for us, and everybody for tuning in to Lunch with Tech Leaders. Hope you found this conversation informative and valuable. We'd love to have you join us for the next episode, where the team's going to discuss the serverless topic, logging and monitoring. As always, the next episode will feature expert guests and interactive conversations. So be sure to tune in. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.